Hey everybody, HomeSliceHenry here, and in today's video we're taking a look at a move update that most players may not even know happened, and that is the move Fly being given to Vikavolt. Fly is a terrific flying type charge move, and it does give Vikavolt access to a nuke move for the first time. Vikavolt is a very glassy Pokemon, it's a bug and electric type, and for the moves I'm running Legacy Volt Switch, X-Scissor, and Fly. To test it out, I paired it up with a Poliwrath on the lead and a Skeledirge on the safe switch. So without further ado, let's hop into the matches, and let's test out Fly Vikavolt in the Open Ultra League. Hopping into the first match, picking up a bit of a tricky lead, Poliwrath into Shadow Gliscor. Shadow Gliscor hits for super effective damage with the wing attacks, but the nice thing about Poliwrath is not only do I get a guaranteed debuff from Icy Wind, but I can return fire for double super effective damage. My opponent is going to look to massively overfarm. I'm going to let this go. Even if they go for the Earthquake, that's fine by me. They go for the Earthquake. Earthquake does not KO thanks to the debuff from Icy Wind. I make it to Icy Wind number 2, and my opponent is going to double shield. Now that they're debuffed, I feel comfortable sending in the Skeledirge. Opponent is going to send in Tentacruel, and I'm going to respond with Vikavolt. Vikavolt, this is a situation where potentially having Discharge could be helpful, but I should still be able to do some nice damage with Fly. Opponent goes for the Scald. Thankfully, Scald does not get the attack drop. I'm going for the Fly and then looking for the farm down. I think I should be able to get the farm down here, but I miscounted. They make the Scald, and I'm forced to double shield. Really unfortunate. I do leave with some energy, though. And Fly will do some pretty nice damage onto the Gliscor if they decide to send it in. In comes the Gliscor. I'm firing off the Fly right away. Fly, big damage into the Gliscor in the back. It's Trevenant. It's time to fly. Let's go, Vikavolt. Vikavolt is going to fire off the Fly. That does massive damage. In comes the Skeledirge. Oh no, the Incinerate didn't KO. Skeledirge, can it take a Shadow Ball? Yes, it can. With 1 HP left, the high-rank Skeledirge tanks the Shadow Ball, takes down the Shadow Gliscor, and that's a good game. Picking up an incredibly positive lead in the next match, Poliwrath into Greedent. Greedent is going to look to save switch out of here into Cresselia, and I have a fantastic response available with the Skeledirge. Skeledirge able to hit for massive super effective damage with Shadow Ball, and unless they are running Future Sight, which it looks like this one is not, their energy is completely walled here. So I'm now going to fire off the Shadow Ball. Shadow Ball is going to hit for massive damage to the Cresselia. Cresselia continuing to farm, but again, this energy is not particularly threatening to the Skeledirge. I'm perfectly fine taking that damage. I'm looking to farm up quite a bit. I do end up throwing on alignment here, but I wanted to get as much residual energy as I possibly could. Disarming Voice is going to pick up the knockout. In comes the Greedent, and I'm going to start spamming out these Disarming Voices. Disarming Voice won't do a ton of damage to the bulky Greedent, but at this point, I'm just looking for any damage that I can get. Greedent forced to fire off a charge move as they do not want to take any additional damage. They're forced to go for the Crunch, which will get the KO. I send in the Poliwrath, and my opponent is going to be firing off energy. They go for the Body Slam. Body Slam does some solid damage, and the opponent is staying in. So whatever's in back may not be a big fan of a Poliwrath with an energy lead. Body Slam will connect in the back. Oh no, it's Giratina. And I have a Vikavolt in the back. This is looking extremely tough. I land the Icy Wind, which is good, get the guaranteed debuff, and I'm going for Icy Wind number 2. This is probably going to be shielded up by the Giratina, and it is, and my goal now is basically just to never shield the Poliwrath. I'm just going to force them to throw energy here, and then hopefully Vikavolt can clutch. I continue to farm up. I make it to another Icy Wind. They're now going to be 3 stages debuffed, but the issue is the switch timers are very misaligned. I send in the Vikavolt. They're heavily debuffed, so I know that I can survive this. My opponent fires off the Dragon Claw. That does absolutely nothing. In comes the Greedent, but Greedent will not make it to a move before the X-Scissor is reached. X-Scissor will pick up the KO. Back in comes the Giratina, but Giratina, by switching out, has successfully reset that -3 attack debuff, and they're now going to be able to do quite a lot of damage with Dragon Claw. Vikavolt, unlike Charjabug, is quite glassy, so these Dragon Claws are definitely going to threaten. I'm farming up, and I'm going for the Fly. Fly is a pretty good move, but Giratina is very bulky. Giratina able to hang on. They make it to a move. Can Vikavolt hang on here? Dragon Claw into the Vikavolt. Vikavolt able to hang on with a fraction of HP, make it to the X-Scissor, take down the Giratina, and secure the win as the match timer winds down. We've got mirror leads in the next match, Poliwrath versus Poliwrath. Definitely don't mind seeing this here. Unfortunately, the opponent is actually lagging to start the match. So I'm just going to wait for them to do 4 more counters once they come back, and now we should be back to even energy. Looks like my Poliwrath does win charge attack priority, which is quite helpful in this matchup, and Scald gets the attack drop as well. So now I'm in a position where I can pretty comfortably win the lead. Opponent goes for the Scald, theirs does not debuff, so the RNG definitely in my favor in this particular game. I again go for the Scald, and again I am able to win the CMP tie. Scald is going to connect. I get a second debuff onto my opponent. My opponent is going to fire off the Scald. That gets my Poliwrath low, and it will also get a debuff. So I do leave with a bit of energy here. In comes a Guzzlord. Poliwrath trying to make it to the Icy Wind, but I get KO'd as I make it to the move, and a Guzzlord up energy. This is extremely bad for my backline. I can send in the Skeledirge. Skeledirge can do okay in even energy, but behind on energy, this is really tough. They go for the crunch. I continue to farm. Opponent is going to go for a catch onto Skeledirge. I decide to go for a bait here because the Shadow Ball doesn't one-shot anyway. Opponent is going to let that through. That's very unfortunate. I'm going to need to get enough Incinerate damage onto the Guzzlord when it comes back in that I can potentially put it into X-Scissor range, but this is going to be very tough. I'm firing off the Shadow Ball. Shadow Ball is going to pick up the knockout. In comes the Guzzlord. I make it to the Disarming Voice. Okay, that's step 1. This is going to be grabbing a shield from my opponent. My opponent is going to throw right away, not allowing me to get any additional damage. And it all comes down to this. Can Vikavolt survive long enough to make it to the X-Scissor? Vikavolt is extremely glassy. They're at a crunch, and a Vikavolt without shields. This is not looking good. I'm 1 away from the double X-Scissor. I get there, but I do get knocked out by the Dragon Tail. We see a familiar lead in the next match, Poliwrath into Shadow Gliscor, and last game was a very good reminder that Vikavolt is extremely glassy, so I need to save at least 1 shield for it, because that thing cannot take a hit. Icy Wind is going to grab the shield and of course grab the guaranteed attack debuff, meaning that I can now survive the Earthquake. So I'm going to no shield. Opponent is going to bait with a Night Slash. I'm able to make it to another Icy Wind, and this is going very well to start off with. The Icy Wind connects, Gliscor barely able to hang on. They're going to make the Earthquake, but again, I can survive this. Earthquake, not going to KO. I switch into the Skeledirge. Opponent now going to respond with Drapion. Drapion able to hit for super effective damage with Crunch, but the nice thing about Skeledirge is I can pretty comfortably tank a Crunch. They do lower my defense, but I'm going to be able to stay on the field and fire off Disarming Voice. Disarming Voice is going to connect. Opponent is going to have to throw here, or I would make it to another charge move. I have a choice. I can shield and go for Disarming Voice, or instead, I can go for a 1-shield Volt Switch farm down with Vikavolt, and look to potentially close out the game with the Vikavolt. Crunch is going to connect. My defense does get debuffed. Let's see what they have in the back. It's a Poliwrath. I go for the fly, but the opponent makes a beautiful catch as they catch the fly onto the 1 HP Shadow Gliscor. Very nicely done by my opponent. I'm farming up, and I'm going for the fly. This should be grabbing a shield from the opponent as they're going to look to debuff. I'm going to throw 1 Volt Switch, wait a turn, and get the catch because 1 good catch deserves another. We catch the Icy Wind, and now there's nothing stopping the wrath of Vikavolt. Vikavolt making it to the fly. Fly is going to get the knockout onto the Poliwrath, and that's a good game. There's trouble in the next match, leading Poliwrath into Tentacruel. This is a pretty big core breaker. It does well into both the Poliwrath and the Skeledirge, so I do have to stay in here. If I get lucky with the Skull debuff and my opponent gets unlucky, Poliwrath does have the potential to make this very close, but I do not get the Skull debuff on my first try. So at this point, I'm not expecting to win it. My opponent doesn't end up getting the debuff either, so it looks like we're playing out the no debuff scenario. So my opponent is going to be able to win the zeros here, but I can potentially look to get some farm on Vikavolt. Scald is going to connect. This game, apparently, we have just turned the debuffs off because there's no debuffs on either side. Opponent is going to go for the Scald, and Scald won't quite pick up the knockout, but 1 poison jab after will. In comes the Vikavolt. Opponent firing off energy. I'm just going to let this through. It's the Acid Spray. Acid Spray, of course, is going to heavily debuff my defense. In comes the Guzzlord. I need to grab a shield with the X-Scissor, and then I can send in the Skeledirge. X-Scissor gets the shield. In comes the Skeledirge. Guzzlord farming up a ton of energy and throwing on very nice charge move timing. All of these battles were done in and around leaderboard elo, so we're going up against some absolutely ferocious competition. In comes a Shadow Gliscor in the back. I'm not baiting, going straight for the Shadow Ball. Opponent is going to respect it with a shield. They're farming up with the Gliscor, and I think I just have to let this go. It's the Aerial Ace. That's not going to KO. I make it to the Shadow Ball. I really need this Shadow Ball to KO. Come on, Skeledirge. Get the knockout. But the Shadow Ball does not. They're able to make it to a move. And this is going to be tough. I have to let this go and trust in Vikavolt to try and win this game. I needed to make it to the double X Scissor, but I'm just too low on HP here. And Guzzlord is going to pick up the farm down. We see an amazing lead in the next match. Poliwrath into Galarian Stunfisk. Opponent is going to save switch into a Venusaur, which is an extremely surprising thing to save switch into, considering this is a meta entirely run by fire types. Opponent is going to be firing off their Frenzy Plant, but Frenzy Plant does so little that I'm honestly just going to commit to a farm down. I will go over 100 energy here, but this way I can leave with 100 energy going into the Stunfisk matchup, as my opponent is going to faint as they make Frenzy Plant number 3. And now I can apply a massive amount of damage onto this Stunfisk. In comes the Stunfisk, I'm firing off the Shadow Ball, and I'm one Incinerate away from making it to another one. My opponent is going to let the first one through. I'm firing off yet another Shadow Ball. Shadow Ball is going to be no-shielded by my opponent. In the back, they have Cresselia. I make it to the last second Disarming Voice just to get a little bit of chip damage, and then it's time for Vikavolt to shine. In comes Vikavolt. Vikavolt farming up. I am going to shield once just because Vikavolt is pretty glassy. Opponent goes for the Moonblast, and they get the 10% attack drop. You've got to be kidding me. That is extremely, extremely unfortunate. X-Scissor is going to connect, but my opponent is going to be able to withstand that damage, and I'm not going to be able to farm down specifically due to that debuff. They're going to go for the Future Sight. That now does massive damage. I build up to the back-to-back X-Scissors, but unfortunately, that Psycho Cut went through. I'm going to get KO'd here. So things have suddenly taken a drastic turn for the worse, and I think I need a catch to win. I'm going to send in the Poliwrath, farming up the switch into the Skeledirge, and getting the catch. Able to make the prediction correctly. Opponent full sent the Future Sight. I'm going to go for the Icy Wind. Their only win con is hoping that the Cresselia can take the game, so I may as well force a shield and force a switch out since they're now debuffed. I get the counter down, I leave with the Icy Wind. Opponent sees the writing on the wall and concedes the match. Picking up a very tough lead in the next match, Poliwrath going up against Clefable. I'm going to throw a couple counters, save switch into Skeledirge, and my opponent is going to respond with a Shadow Swampert. So the good news is I was able to bait out the ground type to hopefully free up Vikavolt in the endgame, as Vikavolt, of course, definitely would not appreciate going up against Swampert. They're going to be overfarming quite a bit and picking up the knockout with the Hydro Cannon. I'm going to wait the timer and then send back in Poliwrath. I need to try and get rid of this Swampert, so that way, hopefully, Vikavolt can do well in the endgame. Opponent is going to be firing off a Hydro Cannon. That's not going to cut it. I'm farming up, and I'm just going for the Scald. Scald is going to be able to pick up the knockout here onto the Swampert. Swampert commits the shield. They already baited once. Are they going to bait again? I decided to just let it go. It's another Hydro Cannon bait. Opponent now going to give up switch. They send in Cresselia, and I'm going to bank some energy on the Poliwrath and bring in Vikavolt. Vikavolt, of course, can hit for a super effective damage with X-Scissor. Moonblast connects. That does so much damage. Vikavolt is so glassy. Oh my goodness. I'm going to be firing off the X-Scissor. X-Scissor does so much damage to the Cresselia. Cresselia firing off a move, and I am going to be starting to commit shields. I'm looking to farm up quite a bit of energy here with the Vikavolt, and now I can go for the X-Scissor. This is going to pick up the knockout. If my opponent sends in the Swampert, I can win CMB and get a KO with the X-Scissor. Are they going to send in the Swampert, or is it Clefable time for the opponent? They send in the Clefable, so I may as well go for the Fly. This is going to do some solid neutral damage to the Clefable. I continue to farm up. Opponent sends in the Swampert, and I'm firing off my energy here. Going for the X-Scissor. X-Scissor is going to pick up the knockout. I'm going to try and get as much damage as I possibly can with a Volt Switch, and then send in the Poliwrath. Can Scald KO? No, it cannot. And unfortunately, I'm not going to get the counter down before they make 2 Meteor matches there. Scald can do quite a lot of damage, but unfortunately in this game, it falls ever so slightly short, as Meteor Mash is going to pick up the knockout, and the opponent takes the game. Hopping into the final match, leading Poliwrath into Guzzlord, so picking up a very positive lead. Opponent is going to look to save switch into Jellicent, and I get to respond with Vikavolt. This is definitely a situation where having either Discharge or Crunch would be quite nice, but the good news is these Volt Switches are still going to do quite a lot of damage, so the Fly is going to come pretty close to KOing here. I fire off the Fly. Fly is going to be shielded up by my opponent. I farm up, and I'm going for another fly. This isn't quite going to KO, but it's going to get them deep into the red. They're going to fire off a last-second Shadow Ball. I've already seen how glassy Vikavolt is, so I am going to respect it with a shield and get the Volt Switch farm down. Opponent is going to send in the Guzzlord, and now, since I have an energy lead, I'm going to be able to start spamming out these X-Scissors. X-Scissor does massive damage to the Guzzlord. I try and go for the X-Scissor, but it accidentally overtaps me. I lose the move, and in the back is Tapu Fini, and this is incredibly bad. I'm firing off the Scald. Scald connects. Thank goodness I get the debuff. That debuff was absolutely essential, as now a Moonblast is not going to be enough to knock out. They go for the Moonblast. Poliwrath, able to tank it. In comes Skeledirge. This is a debuffed Tapu Fini. Tapu going for the Surf. I should be able to make it to double Disarming Voice before they make their next move, and the Incinerates will add up enough to put it into a range where Disarming Voice is going to knock out. Guzzlord does have a move, but Skeledirge wins CMP. Opponent brings in the Guzzlord. I didn't see a Dragon Tail go through. Did they just play to the CMP tie here? Disarming Voice is shielded. They did play to the CMP tie. That's massive. They're now going to zero bubble it, get an extra Dragon Tail of farm, but it's not going to matter. I have the Icy Wind loaded on the Poliwrath. Things got quite scary there in the endgame with the Tapu Fini, but we are still able to take the win. All in all, Fly is an interesting addition to Vikavolt's moveset. Fly does give it a harder hitting charge move than it had previously, even though Fly, of course, does not get same type attack bonus. However, the drawbacks to Vikavolt still very much remain. We've seen Bug Electric types have success, like Charge Bug is one of the best Pokemon currently in the Great League, but Vikavolt just does not share those same stats. Vikavolt has a tremendous attack stat, but unfortunately, its lack of bulk that comes with that is a really big drawback. And as we saw, there were some matchups, even in, I would say, favorable alignment, going up against something like a Guzzlord, where you can hit for super effective damage with the X-Scissor, or a Cresselia, where the bulk just didn't quite hold up. So it is an interesting addition, and maybe if there's a future Ultra League limited meta down the road, it could see some play. But for the time being, unfortunately, the bulk, even with the new move, remains a massive drawback before using Vikavolt. Anyways, thank you guys so much for watching. If you're enjoying the content, make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't. And a special thank you as always to our members here on YouTube. The support you guys provide is sincerely appreciated, so thank you guys oh so very much. And until next time, I've been HomeSliceHenry.